Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I have my disclaimer. The views that you hear from the guest may not represent those of the station or the host. Please always consult with your primary care physician about any advice that you hear in any of my interviews. I am very excited to have with me today my guest, Dr. Andy Bomback, who is author of Long Days, Short Years, A Cultural History of Modern Parenting. He is the father of 3 young children, associate professor of medicine, and a nephrologist at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. And he also wrote the book, Doctor, in 2018. I want to welcome you, Dr. Andy Bomback, to Chatting with Betsy.
Thank you so much for having me, Betsy. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, you are welcome. I'm excited, too. I love the title of your book. So I have to ask you, because it's so true. My son is 38, and you think, oh, when is this going to end, that they're out of, diapers or going through their terrible twos. So how did you come up with the title of your book?
Well, I have to give the credit to the editor because the editor suggested the title, but I did do a little bit of a dive into the phrase. I assumed that this was a very old phrase, the days are long but the years are short. And actually, it's only about 10 years old, at least in print. And the more I thought about it, I started to say, well, if it really is more of a modern expression, it may be a really nice encapsulation of the dilemmas and the anxieties of being a parent today, because the expression really encapsulates so much of what we deal with raising kids today. One is specifically how long these days feel, how tiresome, how exhausting, how difficult it can be to raise kids today with all of the expectations that are placed on parents. But at the same time, there's this tremendous other form of anxiety and this other form of pressure because you know that this is a time-limited opportunity and that before you know it, the years will go by. They go by very fast. And, you're looking at your phone and you look at these pictures of your kid when they were 2 or 3 years old and now they're, starting middle school and you say, where did all that time go? And, did I do it all right? So I think it's a very telling way to describe what it feels like to be a parent today, is that the pressures are so hard, the job itself can be really exhausting and feel interminable day to day, but then before you know it, you feel like you're losing all these opportunities to be with your kids and the years are flying by. So it really, in my opinion, gets to the sort of paradox and the struggles of being a parent today.
Yeah, so your book is not necessarily an advice book, like a how-to be the best parent. This is your way of saying, you know what, this is why parenting is hard. This is, and you have it, in your book. Why is parenting hard today, Dr. Andy? Because I think parenting was always hard with every generation, but I know there's definitely different challenges now than there ever were before because you have the media. But I'd like to hear why parenting is so hard today.
Yeah, I think you touched upon a few things. The first is for your listeners who are looking for a parenting book. I just want them to know that my book isn't really heavy on the advice. It's really more of an exploration of what it means to be a parent today. And I use the phrase, it's a how come book, not a how to book. How come parenting is so hard today? And I don't want to discount what parents went through, 30 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago. I think it's always been very hard to be a parent. But I think the parents of today have a uniquely challenging task and a unique version of how hard it is that no other generation of parents had to deal with. And, I think there's a number of factors why it's become so hard. One, of course, is that parents today are generally living on their own with their kids, whereas in prior generations they were multi-generational households, so there was added help that was part of it. And parents today not only live alone with their kids and not part of multi-generational households, they tend to live further away from relatives than they ever have, and that's part of just sort of modernization and general movements of people. So there's less help for parents in that regard, and specifically less free help and less really trusted resources that you're getting well-meaning and well-intentioned advice. So that's part of it. The second is that there's a competitiveness to parenting today that I think is very unique to 21st century parenting that wasn't there in the 20th century. And what I mean by competitive parenting is that our parenting is on display in a way that it's never been before. So our actions as parents, whether it's because of social media or because of a just overall general transparency in the way people talk to each other now, but I think discussions that I have with other parents about what we're dealing with and what we're doing, and things that I see on Facebook and Instagram and other social media platforms about parenting, everybody is sort of putting their parenting up against each other in a way that feels competitive and in a way that feels like you're marking how you're doing, both your successes and your failures, against everybody else. And I think in previous generations, parenting was more of a private concern. And obviously there's some good things about being more transparent. It allows us to talk more about what we're doing and try to get some improvement. But there have been some pitfalls to this, and I think one of the biggest pitfalls is that everybody feels like they're competing for a diminishing pie. So that really brings me to the last part in terms of what makes it so hard to be a parent today. There's a general feeling that our kids are inheriting a world that's actually worse than the world that we inherited when we were kids. And so you can talk about why it's worse. There's a number of different ways why it's worse. One is just pure economics. Every generation previously was expected to make more money and have more financial security than their parents. That's changed now. And now it's the complete opposite trajectory, that each subsequent generation is projected to have less economic security than the previous generation. But beyond money, just look at the world that our kids are inheriting with changes in the climate, changes in just general discourse, political civility, just the way we treat each other. It's just not the same world that I think as many of us as parents feel like we had when we were younger. And so we feel like we have to equip our kids to try to survive in a very harsh world. And so that adds to the anxieties. And most parents, when they look at this shrinking pot and this harder world that our kids are entering, we generally feel like, well, we can't just sit around and do nothing. We have to actually try to prepare them as best we can. And that leads to this, like I said, competitive spirit to try to get our kids as best prepared as possible for their world.
Yes, I have actually know what you're talking about, even though I raised my son in the 80s. Well, Josh was born in 84, so, the 90s, 2000s. I know my mom, she was born in 1930. It was multi-generational. They all lived, the relatives, very close to each other. Sunday dinner every Sunday. When my son was born, I lived by both sets of grandparents, so I was very fortunate, and so was Josh. But as my younger brother had children, and he lives farther away. So, and then you hear, people, they live farther away, and they don't have that closeness or to know the family history. And I have seen the competitiveness, I call you Dr. Andy, in preschool that I worked at. I mean, these parents wanted homework. You know, you're talking children from 2 to 5 years old. One time we did have a kindergarten, so it was up to 6. But the homework that they wanted, and then I feel like kids now, and like I guess that maybe it's part of the competitiveness, is they're micromanaged. You know, they go to a preschool all day, and then some of the kids go to a learning center. I think it's great that they do like piano and what's that other one? Any kind of physical activity. You know, to go to a gym. But to be constantly like in learning centers, I think it's like bombarding a child. Like, I'm like, let them be kids. Let them have free play. Do you find that with your generation of raising children that it's very micromanaged?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I borrow a phrase from another author, Nora Ephron, where she talks about kids today, how they're being like stuffed like a foie gras goose. You know, like they just keep adding more and more to their plate. You know, like you mentioned, like music lessons, sport lessons, foreign language lessons, this extracurricular, that extracurricular. And I do feel like we sometimes do that at the expense of just their freedom and their sort of feelings of independence. And I think that's one of the sort of challenges of being a parent today is you want to make sure you're giving your kids all the opportunities that you feel like they would benefit from, but you have to sort of balance that against this idea that you're sort of over cultivating them and over scheduling them and adding a new pressure for them in terms of, I have to get from this lesson to that practice to this, you know, get together. So it's hard. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is that in the beginning of the pandemic, there was this weird, almost like collective sigh from parents that all these activities were no longer available, and at least for a short period of time, for like a month or two, when everybody was doing stay at home, there was this sort of odd feeling of relief where you said, you know what, like, it's sort of nice to have nothing planned on a Saturday or a Sunday where all we do is just stay at home and play board games or just go to the backyard. And I thought there might be some lessons that we could learn from that. I think now that things have sort of opened up again, people are going right back to doing all that hyper-scheduling again. As with all things, you don't want to go to either extreme. I think some sort of happy medium between that complete lack of scheduling and complete lack of enrichment that we dealt with in the beginning of the pandemic, which was sort of fun for a weekend here or there, but we realized long term this isn't good for our kids, that they're not seeing other kids and not getting, you know, exposure to music and sports and other great things that they're used to. So you don't want to go to that extreme or say, I'm not going to do anything. But I think we also realized, you know, our schedules were a little bit crazy, and there is some pleasure in having a free afternoon to just say, let's just do nothing. Let's just hang out and but you're obviously searching for a medium, and that's what so much of you know, parenting is so hard, because every time you sort of back off from the hyper competitiveness and the hyper scheduling, even though I think at heart you know this is okay for your kids and this is good for your kids, you can tend to feel a little bit guilty because you're saying, well, what about all these other kids are still doing all those lessons? Am I not being fair to my kid because I pulled them out of this sport or this lesson? So you know, it's a unique problem, and I think it's something that every parent has to sort of deal with and manage and come up with a strategy that works for them and their families.
Yeah. So yes, I actually I do agree with you, Dr. Andy. There has to be a balance. You know, I don't believe personally in over-stressing a kid out, you know, where they're just constantly bombarded, that their day is micromanaged. You know, you have school, you have karate, you might have, I don't know, skiing lessons, whatever lessons that they have. I believe in let them have free time to explore their world and just to have their own creativity. And it would crack me up when I would see this in the preschool with and the parents were, you're right, very competitive with each other. You know, my child does this, or my child had this recital, and especially in like certain cultures, is very competitive, and it is that goal to be very successful at a young age and actually prepare the child for college starting really in preschool. And I'm not kidding, folks. I have seen this, and it just like boggles my mind. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and my parents would open up the door and say, you know, there you go. Here's your entertainment. We weren't entertained. We were micromanaged. If we wanted to take music lessons, that was fine. We had to find our own entertainment, which would mean, getting kids together in the neighborhood for a game. Do they still do, in this day and age, play dates? I know play dates was a big thing back in the 90s.
These still do happen. They were on hold a little bit during COVID, and then for a while they were only, at least in the circles that I frequent as a parent, were only what we called outdoor play dates. But I think we're getting back to like the traditional play date, which is great. I mean, kids love it. I think it's a great opportunity for kids to sort of cultivate their friendships and have one-on-one time with each other. So yeah, we still do play dates. But even I would say even the play dates that my kids have feel very different from the play dates I had when I was a kid. I felt like when I had a play date as a kid, we only heard from the parents maybe once per 2 or 3 hours, and it was like, are you guys gonna eat something? It's like, whereas like now the parents are much more present in the play date, and I think that's sort of indicative of how parents are just generally more involved with their kids than they've ever been.
Yes, my son is funny. My son is 38, and he says to me, parents do what their kids want them to do now, Mom. If the kid is bored, parents make sure that their kids are entertained. And he goes, and it wasn't like that when you were growing up. And I said, no, it wasn't. If I told my parents I was bored, they would find something for me to do, clean, dust, and they would just say, go hit your head against the wall. It wasn't, they didn't care about entertaining us, is what I really want to say. But that was back, in the 60s and 70s. And, when I was growing up, it was safe to go play in the street, and it was safe to go to a neighbor's house. You didn't even tell your parents. You just went. And now it's totally, it's just totally different.
Yeah, but I think you hit upon something that's really crucial. I mean, I know I struggle with this myself as a parent. Is this idea that we have to keep our kids entertained or we failed them. And that's, like you said, prior generations of parents often, took on the attitude that it's not my job to entertain you. You need to learn how to entertain yourself, and what an important skill to teach kids. So I often have to fight against my own impulses where, my kids will say I'm bored, and I'll say, you should do this or do that or do that. You have all these toys, all these games. You have your siblings do something, and they say, no, I want to play with you. And, it's really important that you just sort of try to get your kids to realize that they have more autonomy and independence and skill and enterprise than we actually generally give them credit for. So.
Yes, and I think, children learn to be more creative that way. I mean, we got really creative with the big old box. That was like the best, rolling down the grass in the front lawn with the big old box. I mean, that was entertainment. Playing with your your siblings, if you had them, was, we entertained ourselves. And I have to ask you, Dr. Andy, when did parenting become a verb? And do you think it should be a verb?
Whether it should be a verb, that you could have actually that was the original concept of my book, was to really explore that specific question: should it be a verb? Because when you have it as a verb, it really makes parenting into something that you do and work at, and you sort of change it into an existence, from being an existence into a skill. And when you make it a verb, you basically are implying that it's something that needs to be mastered and honed, or can be mastered or honed, and that to me is a potentially troubling thing. But as the verb form of parent, if Google does something which is very helpful, is that they actually, because there's all these archives of books on Google with millions and millions of books, and they're all scanned, they can actually tell you when words start to appear in the language and in print. And so the verb form of parenting sort of made its first appearance in the 50s, but it really didn't start to take root until the late 70s and the 80s, and then by the 90s, 2000s, it just sort of exploded. And now, if you look at books about parenting, and I'm just saying it here myself because parenting is a verb form, it's a gerund form, parent is used more as a verb than a noun now. So it really has, and so that to me is very symbolic, because it's moved the idea of being a parent from a role or just a general existence to an actual action or job or skill that you're working at all the time.
Yes, and you know what, I think, Dr. Andy, this is my own opinion, my observation. I think each generation of parents thinks that I do the right job, that I treat my child right. And I know with my own situation, I was determined I am not going to be like my parents. I did not like how I was raised, and I was not going to do that to my child. So I think each generation tries to improve upon the others, and I hope I did the best that I could with my son. My son thinks I'm the best. My son is 38 and he has special needs, but he's so he's just a good kid. I mean, he just was. And then sometimes you have these kids that are just downright stubborn, and take a little, more time and more, work with them. And I'll just give a comparison, like me raising my son and from my parents. I had an older brother who, at that time, they didn't call, they didn't really talk about disabilities, but I believe that my brother did. And my son has disability, so he was slow in, toilet training. And my father said to me one day, "Oh, your mom threw the diaper in Bradley's face, and then he was toilet trained." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to do that because that's child abuse, and Josh has a neurological problem. If you can't understand that, then I don't know what to tell you, Dad. But you're not going to do that to him, I'll tell you that. I won't stand for it." So there's, a difference, and especially in like what people thought was considered abuse, which now, as older, I realized. I think a lot of children, and growing up at my age, I'll be 65 soon, there was this like emotional and mental abuse. And do you see that in like your generation of raising children, or do you think parents are less abusive that way? I mean, I certainly hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the sort of positive changes about parenting is that I think we've learned just how how impactful our words and actions are on children. And I think, I talk in the book about how there's sort of like almost too many resources available for parents that it can feel overwhelming just how many different resources are there for us to use. But I think one of the nice things about the sort of explosion of parenting resources, whether it's books or podcasts or websites, is that there is a lot of information out there about how much our words and actions impact kids on a day-to-day basis, and how important it is to be really careful and thoughtful about how we talk to kids and how we interact with kids. And I think when I grew up, there were sort of two dominant modes of parenting, and specifically about discipline. And I mean, you have to understand that discipline is not always a bad thing. In fact,
right.
Discipline can be very helpful for kids, and kids do need discipline. And the younger they are, the more disciplinary interventions they may need. There's like some crazy statistic I once read, which is that like for a toddler, they get disciplined like once every 2 or 3 minutes if there's a parent around. So, when I was growing up, there were two dominant models of how you discipline. One was called the power assertive model, and the other one's called the love withdrawal model. And the power assertive model is basically saying, like, you do this or you're going to get this punishment. And the love withdrawal model is more just like, I'm so upset you're doing this, I don't want to interact with you. So one is sort of basically saying, like, you better do this, you better obey, or there's going to be a major consequence. So basically frighten the kid into doing the right thing. And the love withdrawal model is,
I lost you, Dr. Andy.
I'm not going to be around for you.
There you go.
Yeah. So
right.
It's like fear of abandonment makes you do something. And I think most of the modern parenting resources say like neither of those is going to be the best for the kid. And what we really want to try for is this sort of inductive discipline model where you actually engage with your kids and you let them, talk with you and you talk with them and you try to teach them why their misstep or misbehavior is impacting people and how it's affecting other people, and try to give them some sort of moral education on why they need to modify this behavior. So, I mean, it's still discipline, but it's done so in a way that's trying to induce empathy and
yes.
what's called pro-social behavior.
Yes. I totally believe that. When I was working in the preschool, I know my coworkers thought I was probably a little cuckoo, but I believe that we can teach children empathy and compassion at a very young age. So when a child would take a toy away from their friend or would talk mean to them, I would take them both aside and I would say to the child who did it, you hurt your friend's feelings. How would you like it if your friend took away your toy or called you this name? How would it make you feel? Exactly. And I said, well, then they don't like it either. And I would, that's how I handled it. I mean, I had to put them in timeout, but I really wanted them to know, try to understand, to have compassion and empathy. Like you wouldn't want it done to you, then don't do it to someone else. And I told you before we started to record, Dr. Andy, I was like stunned and shocked when I saw how children behaved with their parents, and the parents are trying to me, as this is what I saw, trying to be their friend. And I'm like, my son knows he could come to me with any problem, but I'm not his buddy. I'm his mom. And when I saw these children hit their parents, scream in their face, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And I would actually have the parents say to me, Miss Betsy, they don't listen to me. And like they brought a fake sword to school, and I go, we're not allowed to have that. And I said to the child, can I please have the sword? You can't bring this in here. And I gave it to the parent. No problem. This is funny, Dr. Andy. I even had parents tell their children, if you don't brush your teeth or eat, they're going to tell Miss Betsy. And they didn't want to make Miss Betsy unhappy, I guess. But just what I saw, I even had parents, this mom and dad, say to me, "Can you tell our son not to hit us out in public?" And I went, What? And they said, "Yes. Can you tell him not to hit us in public?" I said, "Does he hit you in private?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Let me tell you something." And their son was big for a 4-year-old. And I said, if you let him hit you now at 4, he's going to pack quite a wallop at 14. You need to have him stop. And they said, well, he won't listen to us. So when they would come in and the son would go and he would punch his father right in the stomach. And I go, Harsh, don't do that. And the father would go, "That's okay, Miss Betsy." And I said, "No, it's not, because the other children see that behavior. I don't want them to see that behavior." I was just shocked. Do you feel, Dr. Andy, and your peers of people your age, are they trying to be their child's friend also?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fine line. We definitely, I think if you talk to a lot of parents today, they generally say we want to be more present for our kids than our own parents were. And we want to make sure that our kids feel our presence more than we felt our parents' presence. And I mean, there are obviously some exceptions. But I think we've conflated being present and being available and being, supportive with being a friend. And our job really isn't to be their friend first and foremost. Our job is to be their parent. And I think that can be, a difficult challenge for parents. But I mean, and I one of the reasons why circling back to something we said earlier, that this is not an advice book, is I don't really feel like I'm equipped to give advice. A lot of the things we're talking about, I made all these mistakes, and I continue to at times make these mistakes. In fact, just this morning, my wife, I was driving her to the airport, and I had just come back from a business trip myself, so she had the kids all to herself for 3 or 4 days, and she said, while I'm gone, please try to be better about enforcing boundaries, because the kids were all saying, like, "Mommy, you're so mean, and Daddy's so nice," and she's like, that's not the way it's supposed to work. Like, we're both supposed to be equally mean or equally nice. We're supposed to be on the same page and enforce the same boundaries. And if you're not enforcing them and I am, that's not fair. And she's right. So, yeah. It's one of these things where to do parenting well, you have to be able to say, I've made a mistake. You have to be able to really, own up to what you're doing wrong, and you have to be willing to ask for help, whether it's from your partner or your in-laws or your relatives or your neighbors. Like, I think it's such a hard task these days that it really can't be done by 1 or 2 people. Like, you want to try to invoke a bigger circle of support, and the key is you want everybody in that circle to sort of be on the same page and to really sort of have the same motives and the same interests and the same love for the kids that you're raising.
Yes, that's true. That's why I would suggest that parents really search out, if they put their child in daycare, preschool, what their philosophies are. If you hire a nanny, what are their views? Are they going to abide by what, you want for your children? The babysitters. It's true. It does, as the saying goes, takes a village. And I think as parents, we always question, did I make a mistake? And you know what? It's okay to say, I made a mistake, and to apologize to the child. Many people might see it as a weakness. I don't. If I did something wrong, or if I yelled at my son, I went and I apologized to Josh. I said, Josh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled at you. And Josh is very forgiving. But, you know, we do. We lose it sometimes, and we're not perfect. It's, you know, the child doesn't come with the manual, right, Dr. Andy? We learn as we go.
But I think what you said, you know, I don't want to sort of skirt over what you just said. I mean, because I think one of the keys to being a good parent, especially nowadays in this very sort of stressful era of parenting, is being able to have those sort of genuine, honest, open-hearted discussions with your kids. And, you know, going back to what we talked about with discipline, one of the parenting coaches I spoke to said to me, like, if you really want to punish your kids, you just sit down with them and make them talk to you. That's like
that's a good one.
The last thing they want to do. You know, you just sit down there and so you mentioned timeout. Like what the way this person would say you should do timeout is you say, let's take a timeout, but we're going to take it together. And you go to the room with the child, and you know, when things have sort of settled down in that room, you say, so what happened? Tell me what happened. And you don't really leave the room until you feel like you've gotten everything out, and you've had your chance to hear what your child has to say, and your child has a chance to hear what you have to say. And
I love that.
That takes time. That takes patience, and that that takes a lot of effort. But that's probably the way we have to do it.
Yeah, I really like that, Dr. Andy. I really do. I mean, in a school, that's not possible, but at home, in the home environment, that's, you know, very possible. And I say this all the time on my show, Dr. Andy. With children, we have to keep the lines of communication open. You know, if your children come to you with a problem, I say let them vent and let them be able to come to you, because if they can't come to you as a parent and you shut communication off, they're going to go to someone else, and that person may not give the advice that you would want your child to have. And then they fall into doing bad choices. And I really believe in just letting your kids be able to vent, to say, you know what, I don't like, you know, whatever it is. My son was a caregiver for his dad, and he said, I don't like changing Daddy, and I don't like Alzheimer's. And I said, you know what, Josh, I don't either. I understand. I don't like it either. And, you know, just to do that, you know, or say how they really, what's going on in their life, I think is so important. And if I may give any advice to you, Dr. Andy, that's what I would give, is to keep those lines of communication open, just like you're doing, because it's so important, you know. It just is to me really important. And, you know, I'm not my son's buddy, but he knows. And I think children need to know they could come to you, to a parent or guardian, and feel safe. That's another thing, is when your child is talking to you or like about bullying, and they're crying and they're upset, the worst thing a parent could do is say it's your imagination. That's not happening. You know, just let your children vent, and then if you need professional help with their emotional needs, mental health, then take them. That's my advice. Yeah.
No, I think, look, I mean, you have experience in this, and I think what you're saying is really accurate and really important, but it also, you know, it's not easy. I think we don't want to make this is the easiest thing in the world. It's a very challenging thing.
It is. It's challenging, and I'll tell you what, Dr. Andy, I think it's more challenging now, and I do feel for parents like your generation and younger, because the pressures, you're right, social media, and children with social media, and I think exposing children to social media. I have found that, and through the years of being at the preschool, that children's attention spans were shorter. because of all the technology, very hard to keep their attention span. And I feel like they were more immature for their age than the other classes were before them. And I don't know if that's to do with social media or their parents or both, but I just think that it is a totally different world from what I grew up in, that's for sure. But I just say, you know what, we all do the best we can as parents.
I think that I mean, you never want to discount what you just said. Everybody who's doing this work of parenting, with the extremely rare exceptions, but 99.99999% of all parents are doing the best that they can and trying really hard, and their motives and their wishes for their kids are always well intentioned. But it's where you trip up and when you make mistakes. That's when the struggle can be at its hardest. It's never a long day. To go back to the title, it's never a long day when everything goes smoothly. You never say, "Wow, that was the longest day. We had so much fun from morning to night." Right? So the long days are the days when mistakes are made, when something doesn't go the way you planned it, and you just have to keep pushing through it.
Yeah, and you know what I think, Dr. Andy? I mean, this is just my opinion. I think it's okay for a parent, well, I do it, to say, you know what, I made a mistake to their child. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry if I didn't handle it correctly. I'll try to do better next time. Or let's look at it. What can we do better? And that's how I look at it. I mean, my parents very seldom would apologize if they did something wrong. Very seldom. So I think it's a good thing.
Not only is it okay, I mean, it's actually extremely helpful.
Yes.
Because what you're doing in that situation is not only addressing the child's feelings and saying, I made a mistake, let me own up to it, but you're also modeling for the child, this is how you own up to a mistake. Like there's an old saying, do as I say, not as I do. But kids actually will do as you do, not as you say. So
right.
Kids will follow you in terms of how you act much more than they'll follow you in terms of what you prescribe for them. So if you're able to model, appropriate apologies, appropriate attempts to reconcile, I mean, that's huge.
Yes, I think so. I think that it's a child would see that you're sincere. They go, oh, wow, mom and dad could admit that they made a mistake. And they're not afraid to admit it, so I shouldn't be afraid to admit when I make a mistake either. And I think, that's really great. I was really concerned, talking about making mistakes in parenting. When my husband died, he died right before COVID, and COVID happened. And Josh could not work, couldn't socialize, and people with special needs love routine. They like a schedule. And it was ripped away from him. I felt bad for him. I couldn't take away his pain. And I told Josh, I'm sorry, I can't take away your pain. And I offered it, to take him to see someone, but he just wanted to talk to me. And I said, and I felt like I was going through my own grief, and I didn't know if I was 100% there for him. And I said to him, Josh, if I wasn't there for you 100% at that time, I'm sorry. Did I help you? Did you think I helped you? He said, yes, you helped me. You were there for me. So sometimes we don't see ourselves as being maybe a good parent or doing the right job, but our kids do think that we did the right job. Hopefully they do. But, it's just like we said, you can only do the best you can at the time with the knowledge that you know. This is what I tell caregivers. And same thing with parents. You do it the best you can with the knowledge that you have. And that's why a book like yours being very honest and open about the challenges and what you're facing as a parent. There are other parents facing, of course, the same challenges. And I want to thank you, Dr. Andy Bomback, for writing your book and coming on my show.
Well, thanks so much
so enjoyed talking to you.
Really great conversation. I think we touched upon a lot of the topics in the book and also just about parenting in general. So I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. And where can people find your book?
So they can find the book on any online bookstore, wherever you buy your books online, like Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, etc. Also, most brick-and-mortar bookstores should have it. If they don't, you can always ask them to order it. And also, most public libraries should have it. And if your public library doesn't have it, you can also ask them to order it. The book is called Long Days, Short Years, A Cultural History of Modern Parenting. It's from MIT Press. And I really don't care where your listeners get it. I don't care if they buy it or they get it from their library. I would just love for them to read it. And if they do, please let me know what you think.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say the name of the book, but thank you. Dr. Andy Bomback, please go get this book. It's holiday time. And what a great book to give to a new parent, to give to a parent that already has young children. And I think it would just be a great gift to give to someone. And I just love talking to you, Dr. Andy Bomback, and I wish you much success in your career as a book writer and author, and selling this book and book sales. And I don't know how you have time to write a book and be a doctor, but God bless you, and a parent of young children. You certainly have your hands full.
Well, it's a labor of love, but I do enjoy doing it, and I learn a lot by writing about it. So I feel like I became a better parent working on this book, and I hope that readers will feel like they become a better parent by reading it.
Yes, I think they would become a better parent. Thank you, Dr. Andy Bomback. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Folks, thank you for listening. You have just listened to Dr. Andy Bomback. The information will be in the blog. I want to thank Jeannie White, the station manager, Passion World Talk Radio, for writing the blog, producing the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO, Passion World Talk Radio, for making this all possible. Thank you for listening, subscribing. It is free to subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. I'm on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeart. And I highly recommend that you subscribe because I have phenomenal guests on my show. And I want to thank you all again for listening. I wish everyone a happy holiday season or a peaceful one. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, to please be kind, shine your light bright, because if we all did that, it would be a much happier, brighter world. Take care, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.